Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ray Cobb. I'm from the Attleboro Advent Christian Church. This verse up here says seek and save. But the whole verse says, a lot of times you'll notice Jesus being left out of things. It says, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. So part of loving the lost is seeking the lost and to bring them the message of the gospel so they can be saved. I brought my watch along with me. I've had this watch for 25 years. I've never put a battery in it, made by Timex. Lo and behold, it probably will fail right now, but anyway, it hasn't. Glad to be with you this afternoon. What does it look like to love the lost? Well, you can do a lot of nice things for a lost person. It's like, if you saw a blind man tapping his way and he was heading for a cliff, you wouldn't say, can I get you a lunch? Can I do something good for you? You would kind of warn him, I think, about the cliff coming. Try to direct him away from that. And that's kind of like what Christians are appointed to do. Yes, being a friend is important, very important. But how long do you build a friendship before you tell them about Jesus and the gospel? Now, I grew up in the church, and there's one thing I decided very young. I said I could never be a Christian because I could never share Jesus with anybody. Don't ever say that. Because God can do a transforming work in your life. What happens to a person that doesn't know Jesus? What is going to happen to them? Our friends, our neighbors, people that we work with, it's tough sharing Jesus with them. We have a fear that, they don't want to listen. They don't want to hear it. And so we put a wall up and say, I can't do that. Fear is one of the big things. Now, Jesus said, if you follow him, he said, I will make you a fisher of men. This is something he will make you do if you're following Jesus. We take that very seriously. He wants us to be intentional in sharing his good news with others. I've kind of learned how to do this. I could, over the years, I could share the gospel if the subject came up, but I could never make the subject come up. I could never be intentional about it. Until one day I saw a TV program called Way of the Master, and how they took you out in the street and they asked questions like, well, how many times have you lied? What does that make you? How many times have you stolen something? What does that make you? Ever take God's name in vain? And I'm watching this, I says, how in the world do you ask questions like that to people? They're not going to pay attention to you. But here's what I learned. I kind of memorized it, the steps, and then I was amazed when I actually did it. And I could see the light come on in people's eyes. The conviction, the Holy Spirit says, when I come, I will bring conviction of sin. And I could see this in people's eyes. I could see it, people that were Christians for years, but never understood the gospel. And the light bulb would come on. I could see this. So this is a very, very effective way, because I'm not telling anybody they're a sinner. They're telling me that they are, because I'm asking good questions. One of the things you want to learn is how to ask good questions. Greg Kokel, Stand to Reason, has a wonderful program called Tactics, Columbo Tactics, how to ask good questions, how to be in control of a conversation, how to not get into an argument, because an argument won't lead anywhere. What we try to do, and I have a table over there, you can see me afterwards. I've been a volunteer with Open Air Campaigners in Boston for 8.5 years. I just retired at the end of August. I've been to Boston like about 400 times. On the street in the summertime, in the subways in the wintertime. I get to share the gospel right up front with people. And you'd be surprised how many people you run across that have Christian backgrounds, grew up in the church, kicked the whole thing overboard, And you get to explain the gospel to them that they've never really understood before. And they thank you for it. I had one guy, we got off the train. He made another attempt to come over and shake my hand. Now, I mean, this is one of the questions that I ask Christians. They say, I'm a Christian. I say, well, okay, let me ask you this. Suppose I'm not a Christian, I want to become a Christian. What are you going to tell me? You know that 99% of the time you get a blank look? Now, I did that to a girl on the street that she said, you could ask me anything you want. I'm a graduate from a Bible college. I asked her that question. She said to me, you know, that's a good question. But if we don't ask any of these questions, you never find out things. Now, at the age of 66, I went to New York City. We did an evangelism. It wasn't really a training, it was actually a doing. They expected to do open-air preaching. I was scared stiff to go. But I said, I'm just going to make myself go. And this is what I found. I mean, I was scared to death. The first time I got up to preach on the subway car, that moment I stood up and opened my mouth, all that fear was gone. You know why? Jesus said, if you go and proclaim the gospel, I'll be there with you. Fear is still there. I was actually more afraid to come up here and talk to you guys down the street. It's crazy. But that fear is still there. But I know this. When I go and actually do it, there is no fear. It's up here. We say we can't do it. But yet the verse says, I can do all things through Christ. Be intentional about sharing the gospel. The gospel is the good news that Jesus died, was buried, and rose again. How do you tell somebody that? By doing a bunch of good things to them, with them. Now, those are important. I think you get the point. You can build a friendship for 6 years. That person ends up dying. You never told them the gospel. One of the things here, okay, I was praying one morning. I was going to Boston. I knew we were going to go in the subway. In the wintertime, we do the subway ministry. Very interesting. Subway's a very busy place, very noisy place. I don't have a loud voice. I've learned a little bit about projecting my voice. But anyway, when you start preaching the gospel in the subway, you might get 20, 25 people there. All of a sudden, that noise level drops. The Holy Spirit takes over. And you get responses. Now, what we're doing was trying to sow a seed. We're not trying to get a decision. We're not trying to get somebody to bow their head and say this prayer after me. Because you might get a stillborn. We want to give them what Greg Coker will say, try to put a stone in their shoe, or sow a seed, something that they can grab a hold and think about in a nice way, and always end the conversation as a friend. And don't ever get into an argument. This is something that we have to keep working at. I have to work at it at home, too. Don't tell my wife about it. Okay. Anyway, I was praying, you know, Lord, it would be kind of neat to run across somebody today that we've talked to before, that we've kind of touched their lives, because we don't know. We never see a person again. We're on the front lines. I'm in the subway, I'm giving out tracts. This lady comes by, she takes a tract, and I didn't notice her. She walks down 15, 20 feet, she turns around, comes back, and stands in front of me. I says to her, we talked before, and your name is Jamie. That had been about 4 years. The reason I know your name is because somebody we talked before took our picture, and I have it at home, and I have your name on it. Every time I go through the pictures, her name pops up. She started crying. She gave me a big hug. She said, you keep sharing the good news. Another lady my daughter knows as a friend. They were talking one day, And she says, I met somebody downtown in our town, and they told me about the gospel. It changed my life. My daughter says, that was probably my dad. Well, I met the lady in 2015. This had been about 7 years. Later, she posted on Facebook, she said, I had no idea when I had a random conversation with a stranger in the center of town, how drastically my life would change. I finally got to thank that stranger. Thank you, Lori, that's our daughter, for introducing me to the man who introduced me to the God who rescued me. Be intentional about sharing the gospel. Don't be afraid. We put these walls up. And I think my time is up, but I wanted to share with you how to get into a conversation is by using tracks. One of our favorite icebreakers is a $1 million bill. I can talk to you about afterward how to use them. You don't have to be gifted to give out a gospel tract. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have a winning personality or get decisions. You don't have to worry about getting the message wrong. Therefore, you don't have to worry about failing. Do you have to have a gift to give somebody a piece of paper? But that can be a scary thing, right? I had a fellow that worked for me 2 years. I tried to get him out in the street to give out tracts. Finally, after 2 years, he went out, and you can't stop him now. Because I told him, I said, you give that first tract out, all that fear is going to disappear. And that's the same way as with presenting someone the gospel. We have the greatest message in all the world. People need to know that gospel message. But somehow we have a wall up saying, I can't do it. But don't ever say that to God, because he'll be there right with you every step of the way. Thank you. Want to talk to me? I can be over the table sometime later on. I want to thank you for listening. I could tell you about a telemarketer that called me back. How many of you here like telemarketers? I said, I'll give you 3 minutes if you give me 3 minutes. He promised that. He says, okay, it's your turn. I got through about 2 or 3 of the commandments. We were cut off. But who called me back in 5 minutes? That same guy said, I want you to continue. That's happened all over the place. Be intentional. Thank you.